should Wales ever need someone bold, I'll rise up to help them, mind you, I'm 600 years old.
Well, bloody hell. Dacwrddanesh.
Dacwrddanesh I lawr ar y... What's that? What is the lyrics?
Dyna dy law I mi, ac farawn I ben y mynydd. Dacwr rhywun heibio'r cynnig I fi.
Mae'n y plan sy'n dod or something.
Rhywle tebyg I mi.
Yeah, rhywun heibio'r tebyg I mi. Dwi'n so far lati.
I'm on my, I think, my like 15th pint of Carling.
Nice. Nicely done.
What are you on now?
Oh, God. Let me count
Is it
them up.
pint?
Let me count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 real drinks. 2 fakies, 2 Heineken Zeros, and I'm on my first Rummy Tum Tum.
Well, I'm losing weight, right? So I'm not eating tea in the week, which is.
I was going to say, how are you straight? Like, I'd be asleep by now.
Well, I said to you, didn't I, at the start? I was like, I've not had any tea tonight. I had Belvita biscuits for like about 3 o'clock.
So you have had tea? You're a liar.
No, it was a 3 o'clock snack. You bastard. But I said to you,
as if Belvita, a couple of Belvitas would actually constitute dinner as well.
But I don't eat after 3 p.m. because if I don't eat after 3 p.m., I lose so much weight by the next morning. But
how do you do it? I way sooner give up breakfast than din-dins.
Well, I know that the next morning, because I lose weight every day doing it. I know if I wake up, so say if I stop eating at 3, I'm starving. I know when I wake up in the morning, I can have whatever I want for breakfast because then I still lose weight. So then I go mental for breakfast and lunch, and then I go, right, well, that's me done for the day. And on my own, I'll be a gannet and I'll eat anything. Whereas when Emma comes home from work, I have to be I'm more disciplined. So I'm like, right, if I eat everything in the day and then when you come home, I'm quite good. So I've lost like 6 kilos from doing it.
It's class, man. We anyway. For any new listeners, Frank's is often a secret eater when it comes to his wife. The amount of times we go out for, I don't know, watch a cinema or just to catch up, whatever. And you go, if there's any sort of fast food outlet on the way home, he's like, I have chicken Burger King on the way home. I can only imagine you go,
last week after we saw Obsession, best film I've seen in years.
Oh, great film, by the way.
Yeah. And also, like, I've had a lot of like my poor little puppy, my dog being unwell. So the minute that happened, I said this to my brother earlier. The minute I have any sort of like emotional strain on my life, I comfort eat to the max. When I saw you, went to the cinema, and I was like worried about Bo on the way home. I pulled in and I got 3 double cheeseburgers.
Might as well have 3 double cheeses.
And I took her to the emergency vets in the morning. On the way back from the emergency vets, I got like these, like the burger, the McDonald's like bacon things. I had like 2,000 calories in like the space of 4 hours.
Well, I meant to cope with this without a couple of fucking McRibs, is it?
Talking of Welsh heroes like myself, we're doing the final part of Glyndŵr, and I got to say, I've enjoyed it. How have you found it, Kat?
Thoroughly enjoyed it, mate. Like I said, I can't stop thinking about how good a film it would make, and also just the detail in it. That I just was totally unaware of. Yeah. No,
I think I'm really proud of like getting the specifics because like you can read the overall stuff, but I'd like
not to glaze you too hard, mate. But the darting back and forth, like sort of chronologically, but it making sense narratively. I really like that. You tee something up and then
you might appreciate this because I was going to say I'd love you to write a script for this and actually try and make a film of it. Because when I did this, right, I learned all the history and I wrote it down in an actual timeline. And I was like, right, here's the timeline, but what part kind of goes back to what part? Because if you just read it in one timeline, you kind of go like,
it's about what connects as well, isn't it? You know, like I said, it doesn't always connect chronologically. It's like a Hotspur. It's a grudge.
Exactly.
Years in the making, you know.
It's not like, oh, he's now pissed off from here. His son's already died. You know, you have to know the entire 15-year campaign. But I really like. That's why it's taken me literally a year to kind of literally map it out. And I wrote all the notes. I read it all. I read as much as I could. But it's also boring. Some of the stuff out there is dull. I think this isn't a boring story. It's a fucking amazing story. How did you make this dull?
It needs a story told around it, not a like we said before, that thing where it goes like, well, some stories think it's this, but there was
a bit of this.
In 1718 this was actually discovered that blah blah blah. You take me out of it.
Yeah.
Give me the narrative. Give me the story.
I think I kind of mentioned that in this part coming up here now. But well, should we just get into it? Should we?
Straight, man.
So we reached part 5. I've classed this the demise, but that's not really fair. I don't think that's fair because we're here, so he has. It's not a demise, and I only thought that as I said that out loud.
It's like what's called the Lion King story? He lives in you. Hey-oh, 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 hey-oh.
In what? Just in the Lion King.
Lion King, yeah. He lives in me. Hey-oh, hey-oh, hey-oh. I'm not going to brutalize it any more than that, but it might be in the Lion King 2 that actually is actually, but it's in the Lion King stage play. Oh, you've gone completely silent, mate. I think you've muted yourself.
I was attacking you for your love of gay theatre. My homophobia got done.
Is the furthest thing from gay theatre, just because there's a couple of guys in scantily clad outfits in massive fucking crutches walking around there, pretend to be zebras. You think that's gay? If that's gay, mate, I don't want to be straight.
But it's definitely not in the first one, so fucking
it's in the first fucking theatre production, all right? So,
and
also everyone knows that. Also, some of the best songs are in the second one. Like, what about?
Yeah, didn't you play? You played that at school, didn't you? You played part of the musician for that. Did you play? I'm not joking. I'm not taking the piss. Didn't you play about the musician for? Did you play the skin flute?
You were joking. You lied to my face. Barefaced lie. There's a great song in the second one. Hang on. Think about it. It goes where Scar's son gets outcast from the Pride, right? He goes, deception, and outrage, disgrace, full shame, evil as clear as the scar on his face. It's very good.
You are so cool. Anyway, let me just move on to the next part of my story.
Sorry, back to Glyndŵr. We'll talk about Lion King another time.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay now? So for some reason, my audio went out for a second.
It's all good, mate. You're back in the game.
So I'm going to start off from 1406, and I'll be starting highlighting, like, this is Glyndŵr's political skill. I mentioned before, he was a great warrior. He'd also, like, set up his own parliament or whatever. But there's a thing, so I mentioned the penal policies against him. Yeah. There's a thing called, which is quite confusing if you don't, which really confused me when I was doing this. There's something then called the penal letters, but it's based because he's from a place in North Wales called Penal. So so the penal laws against Wales are different from the penal letters which he sent to King Charles.
Confusing.
VI. Very confusing. But he wrote these letters, and they're really well documented in France. And the Welsh government are trying to get some of them back to Wales so we can see more of them. But anyway, in these penal letters, not penal, they were historic letters between Owain Glyndŵr and Charles VI, who's King of France. And he wrote them all in Latin, which is like really impressive, and he wrote them in Penal in north of Wales. And in 1406, he set out his vision again for an independent Wales, and like we mentioned, he wanted 2 universities, one in the south, one in the north. He wanted them to promote Welsh language and set up a Welsh church. The Penal letters also declared Wales' intention to give allegiances to Charles VI's anti-pope. So you ever heard about this? So this is, again, into the weeds of it.
Like anti-pasta, but with
Well, it's anti-Pope Benedict XIII of Avignon. And I'm not going to go too much into this because it's just fucking so entrenched in its own stuff, right? But an anti-pope is a person who claims to be Bishop of Rome or leader of the Roman Catholic Church, but opposition to the officially elected one. So, very quickly,
if you want to usurp the Pope, is that you put forward an anti-pope?
The French had backed this anti-pope called Benedict, and he wanted to get rid of the real pope, and because this anti-pope had much closer ties to France, and this is called the Great Schism, or often called the Western Schism, because there was an earlier schism in the 11th century. But a schism is when you kind of do a big jolt away from the norm, right? So this is essentially where the French and the Roman Catholics are vying over who's the real Pope. Glyndŵr doesn't give a fuck. He's like, yeah, whatever, mate. Fucking, yeah, sure.
Sending me some ships, mate.
Yeah. Gives us your ships. Yeah. He goes, right, I'll acknowledge the French Pope over the other Pope. And in the letter, he mostly used it, right? So in these correspondence they go back and forth, the French Pope was like, the French guy is like, yeah, but do you want the French Pope? He's like, yeah, fine,
whatever. Yeah.
But his responses, which are recorded, right, the Glyndŵr kind of ignores the whole Pope thing, because Wales isn't even Catholic. It's not us. Even though they haven't done Protestants yet, they haven't had yet the Henry VIII. But we more care about Welsh independence and a Welsh church rather than a Roman or a French church. That doesn't matter. But to avoid all that arguing, he goes, yeah, sure, fine. And he uses every response to slag off the English throughout the entire thing. And he always refers to them as the barbarous Saxons. He never calls them anything
the barbarous Saxons.
And he's asking for the... and during it, he asked for the French Pope to now brand Henry IV and his adherents as heretics for killing and usurping King Richard II, who was also a fan of this new Pope, this French Pope. And then he also does that thing Glyndŵr does so well, which is he ignites history. He goes he notes the Wales and French are the oldest allies potentially in the world, where he goes, in 1212, Llywelyn the Great, Llanyn vowed, and Philip VII agreed their common enemy was England, and then they put one of the first alliances in Britain they'd ever seen.
I like that.
He also then invoked stories of Owain Llawgoch, which you did an episode on.
Love that shit.
And he kind of reminds him of that. So he's just constantly reminding the French and how the Welsh and the French have this long-standing history together. Not asked about the Pope, but he's like, I have to use his responses as I can. But the French king loved that. He was like, oh, I really am into this. So he sent this more soldiers and a renowned Welsh crusader called Dafydd ap Ieuangoch. Again, red probably means of the hair, who was fighting for the French. And at the time, right, the idea was they're going to send this Welshman who fought for the French to go to Scotland to get a fresh treaty that would ally the Scots, the French, and the Welsh against England. And he sends him up there, but David's ship was captured, and David, who was known as Killer of the Saracens because he fought so much in the Crusades, was captured or killed by the English. And there was so much more history around the French, around the French king, who's he's pretty much mad as well. Like Richard II was mad. This French king was also pretty mad, but in reality, his brother was in charge. And there's loads of
puppet king type.
He's
thing.
A bit of a puppet king, but the English had sent so many assassination people to try and kill this French king. And I did write a joke here, but it's pretty shit. I try to say it's so detailed, but this ain't Tales for bloody Versailles.
That's good. I like it.
Yeah, it's the only place I could find that sounded like it had the ale sound. So I was
Two
Tales for
thumbs
Versailles
up from Jackie Nubio. Yeah.
So yes, there's that. Anyway, when the Welsh and French spoke again, so they like I mentioned, the French king sent this guy, this Welsh person, this crusader to go and help, but he'd gone. So the next time the French spoke, the French really wanted to invade England, and they wanted to share the victory, the French contest. They were like, all right, so you are getting involved. The Welsh are going to be here to help. But Wales didn't want that. Wales wanted a free, independent Wales, but France wanted a full-scale invasion of England. So he was like, right, you're coming with us, we're going to attack and invade England. And Glyndŵr was like, no, I never wanted that. Our alliance was, I'm going to protect Wales, and I never have any intention of taking English land other than reclaiming, like, Ludlow, for example. Or
what was considered Welsh, yeah.
But the French were like, no, if you're going to support you, you have to invade. And he was like, well, that's not what my people want. We can't invade.
Because from France's point of view, they want him to be a thorn in their side, and they divide their forces and whatnot, yeah.
So the French, they pulled the remaining 28 warships that have been protecting the ports of Wales, which is so important because, like we mentioned before, we don't have ships. That meant the coast was once again taken over by the English, and they restocked all the castles. And so, like the castles that they were stocked by sea, have been stocked by the French. Now the Welsh were being attacked by the Irish Sea, and this is where we enter the decline of the foreign support.
Oh, sad times.
So the Franco-Welsh army of the 1405, we failed to secure lasting victories. Yes, it was devastating to Carmarthen, all these Welsh towns, but it was Welsh towns. We didn't invade England. By 1406, French shifted to Burgundy and internal crisis. There's a chronicler who implies the French left in like late 1406, and historians note France's limited aid and eventual withdrawal, remarking that they could not give Owain the help that he needed. In short, French support dwindled due to one, a change in French strategy. They were like less interested in the Welsh front, more trying to go from the east. And then second, the expense and the risk of sending troops amid a 100-year war. And like finally, English diplomatic motions changed. They forced the French to stop supporting the revolt and discuss like terms instead. And also the English were amazing with assassins. So they tried to assassinate Glyndŵr like 4 times.
Yeah.
And they failed, but they didn't fail in France. So they sent this assassin. They killed a guy called Duc de Orleans in Paris, and he the Duke. And also, I'm saying this right, Duke like the Duke, and then Orleans like in America, but Orleans,
Orleans,
Duc d'Orleans, Sister Le Bon, in Paris, and this guy was a massive supporter of Glyndŵr. So when they took him out, they stopped him in court, mustering French support.
I was going to say he lost his support in French court then, and
and there are so many stories about the English doing this stuff in France, which I won't go into because I'll talk about this later. But that's like a history. It's a massive history in itself. So that means how they've killed off the French support, literally killing those in France who supported Glyndŵr. Now we look to the Scots, who were pretty keen to help. The Irish weren't so keen, but the Scots were very keen to help, but they struggled. They never intervened directly. They tried to send troops down, but they got interjected. But they had also their own hostilities. But remember I mentioned that big battle they lost, right? In that big battle, James I of Scotland, who was the son of the Scottish King Robert III, he was taken in the battle, in that big battle of Homildon Hill. And in 1406, he was still in captivity, and that meant Scotland they couldn't support Glyndŵr because so many were like
he's like it's like when you take a prince hostage or something like that to basically guarantee you're not going to come against me again because I have such a high value.
And that's mad, isn't it? It's like, I will kill your son if you go any. And so King Robert of Scotland was massively anti-English and fought against them hard in the north. But having lost the Battle of Homildon Hill, which I mentioned a few episodes ago, and got battered by Henry Hotspur, and his son was like in capture, his other sons were dead, he was utterly distraught. And all of his family were dying or were captured. And apparently he died of grief, right, in 1406. But before he died, he went pure emo. And he reportedly asked to be buried under a dunghill with the epitaph, "Here lies the worst of kings, the most miserable of men." Which is so funny.
Oh, here's the king shit. Shittest king in the land.
I'm king shit.
Wah.
But with the king dead, the Anglo-Scottish truces began. So Henry IV removed all the pressure from the north, and any of the remaining nobles in Scotland bowed and submitted. Way after a Braveheart and all that stuff, I
don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be here.
I know. It's like when I was doing all this research, it felt like a horror story where I knew what was to come. It was terrifying. I was like, oh fuck.
This is the part of the movie I'm in the cinema, the 3-hour epic we're watching.
Exactly.
3.5-hour director's cut. I'm gonna be like, I'll be there going,
but think how small we are.
Please.
Look how small we are. Even typography, not even just size in terms of how many people. We're such a small nation, and we withstood more than the French and the Scots, any other nation could.
Pretty much the best in the world, I think.
Well, Scots. I think the Scots are the best in the world, right? And even now, true. Right? By 1410, they engaged in their own political internals. They had no. They not even if they wanted to, they just couldn't afford to engage in a serious campaign to support Glyndŵr. So then we have internal Welsh factors. So we lost the French, we lost the Scottish. We are now done 1410. We're pretty much on our beyond on our own. We then have internal Welsh factors. So we have extreme war exhaustion, not just the word exhaustion. There's a lot of heavy lifting. That we have widespread famine. And it's not being hungry, it's starving. You're dying because you've not got enough food. And this is due to poor harvest, poor weather, crop failures, deliberate destruction of agricultural lands. The weather, which you mentioned, had been so bad because of Glyndŵr controlling it himself, meant that nothing was growing. Thousands of working men and women were dead by 1406. The English did these blockades. Now the French had gone. They were stopping any import of food coming in. They did a scorched policy. They absolutely isolated all the rebels. Welsh nobles were pretty much all dead. Most people by 1407 were losing their appetite. 7 years into a campaign against the biggest army.
Attrition, then, isn't it? It's hardcore.
And most of the Glyndŵr's people were still backing him, but his sons, his brothers, his warriors, they were all dead. And there's the south was pretty much gone. The French had gone. Welsh forces primarily abandoned their sieges and tried to regroup. So by 1407, it was mostly going back to the early days of guerrilla raids, no longer set pieces. And these were quite successful, and they lasted for years. So that's why the campaign goes on for so long. But they were no longer an army.
Yeah, they weren't living those glory days anymore. It was hit and runs and whatever. Yeah.
And by 1407, the English changed tack. Prince Henry was now in control of lots of Wales rather than his dad, and he was no longer doing big, expensive campaigns. Instead, he opted to cripple the Welsh economically, and he set up trade blockades to starve the Welsh into submission. He offered nearly all the rebels a chance to be pardoned in exchange. And he said, if you pay fines... And he also said, if you pay fines, which loads opted to do, and they could pay fines as a community. So it's all right, St. Athan, you rebelled. If you bring 100... what are they called? Not groats. What's the... marks. If you do 100 marks, you'll be allowed. So that he was doing that, and he made them quite affordable fines. So it wasn't too. It was kind of all right, well, I get out of this. And then the Welsh started to lose major castles, this is the end of it now, right? So Aberystwyth, there was a long siege there. This is so mad, what I'm going to tell you. It was a year-long siege. The English sent thousands of troops and a baggage train of 538 pounds of gunpowder, 971 pounds of saltpeter. You know that thing that makes... saltpeter, if you play Kingdom Come, you learn that's the thing that burns insanely quickly and hot.
Yeah.
And it's explosive. And then 200 pounds of sulphur. But the Welsh, they still managed to hold off the siege. 16 months of constant bombardment from the English in Harlech. And this is the first time ever in British history they used heavy guns on a castle in Britain. They dragged 6 cannons over from Bristol all the way to Aber. And the Welsh had never seen something like this before. The Welsh had never seen anything like this before, ever. And then they bring this massive cannon called the Messenger.
The Messenger.
It was ginormous. It was over 5,000 pounds. Right, it was huge. It was literally, it was enough to crumble any castle that would ever withstood anywhere in Europe. And they lit it, they fired it, and it blew up, and it killed hundreds. It killed the entire crew.
Oh wow!
So it was just not.
So
it was so big.
Misfire, just went bang.
It misfired. It couldn't. It was too big.
Didn't shoot
to hold
anything.
What
Just
fire,
blew up,
and it completely decimated its crew. So they were like, "Okay, shit, the messenger might not beat the one."
Yeah. Don't shoot the messenger, mate.
But within the castle, it kind of boosted the morale a little bit, and there's this valiant and absolute beast of a commander. And I wish I could have talked about every single commander, but it goes on for so long. But this guy called Rhys Ddu, who's been involved from the start, was this valiant guy who was in charge of Aberystwyth, right? And he was repelling the attacks. And when they saw this 5,000 pound cannon coming, his troops were like, "We are fucked." And he was like, "Fucking hell, here we go. We're staying here." And the castle blew up. The cannon blew up. They're like, "Shit, we might have a chance." But he was defending it with another commander called William Gwyn ap Rhys Lloyd, who served as the crown. He served originally for the English crown, but switched sides as Rhys Ddu kind of fought for independence. And whilst they were both stood upon Aberystwyth Castle, kind of looking out and deciding what happens next, William Gwyn ap Rhys got hit directly by a cannonball and exploded next to Rhys Ddu. And the few remaining men were like, "We are fucked." So they were like, "Right, we're going to sneak out at night and going to head to Harlech Castle up the couple of miles up north where they thought Glyndŵr was. And it's also really important to remember here, when you're cut off in a siege, you have no idea how everything else is going on.
Yeah.
You have no idea if Glyndŵr is dead. You don't know if he's under a counter. You don't know if the French
because you're not getting any
messages
messages through or anything.
No messages. You might get a few things here and there, but you don't have anything coherent. So anyway, Aberystwyth fell, which was such an important one they took. It fell 8 years after they took over Wales, and it fell on 23rd of September, 1408. And now the rest of the English army could move to besiege the other jewel in the crown, Harlech Castle. So Rhys D, who was in charge of Aberystwyth, was like, all right, I've sneaked out. I'm moving up to Aberystwyth. I'm moving up to Harlech. He managed to, before he ended up moving over, he agreed a 6 weeks truce with the English because he knew it was over on All Saints' Day. He was like, right, well, I will agree with you a chance for us to hand over the castles in the best way possible so no more people die. So Rhys went off to Glyndŵr to tell him that the English nobles and Prince Hal, who were there to hand over, I'm doing this, I'm saving our men. Now what do we do? And so once Prince Hal knew that, he left with a few English nobles and only a few hundred English people stayed behind. But Glyndŵr was fucking furious. He was like, I'm the only person who negotiates the surrender. No one else does. And even though Rhys D had been his best man, he threatened to behead him.
Oh, Christ.
He was like, and this was like a sign that Glyndŵr might be losing control. He was like, shit.
Yeah, sort of
he didn't do it.
The dream had been dying, so it's like desperately clinging on to
But he clearly wasn't that bad because they didn't do it, and then Rhys D stood with him, and Rhys D ended up saying he led more, so he didn't go back to the castle like he said he would, like the English thought he might for some reason. But he lost Aber, and then he led loads more party raids against the English up until 1409 and 1410, so a decade in. And he was like the epitome of a loyal leader for Glyndŵr. He was eventually captured after a pursuit by the English, after he raided a party. He was in a raiding party, attacked some English garrisons, and on the way back he got captured, and then he was tortured to death in the Tower of London in 1410. And then after being tortured, he never gave up Glyndŵr. He was hung, drawn, and quartered.
They love it. As soon as they did it in old David back in 1283.
Harlech suffered the same fate as Aber and was attacked by cannons and another monster cannon. This one was called the King's Daughter. So the last one, the Messenger, blew up, and it was £5,000. And no one in Britain had seen something like this ever. So you both play Kingdom Come Deliverance too? That's based in 1400 to about 1405, which is at the height of this war, and that's when they first introduced the cannons, isn't it? Here it's the exact same thing. The Welsh had never seen cannons before, and this is the start of castles being hit by cannons and like
something unprecedented.
And like I mentioned, the Messenger blew up, and it was £5,000 worth of it was a cannon that had so much stuff to blow down walls. They then dragged another massive one across from England, from Bristol, all the way over to Harlech. And this one was called the King's Daughter. And they loaded it, they aimed it right at Harlech, one of the best castles in Wales, and it blew up again and killed all the English. Just done.
Stop buying cannons, what's the one in Kingdom Come? It's called like God's Finger or something.
Really similar. The other one called Messenger, and this one called the King's Daughter. But they all had names like that. It was all like very religious kind of connotations.
Well, it would have been, I imagine, a religious experience to see that coming towards you going, holy fuck, how are we going to survive this?
Like, they'd never seen fire blow out metal towards it. But so what's important, so Aber was a really important town, but Harlech was where they thought lots of Glyndŵr's family were, and they were besieged there. Glyndŵr himself either left Harlech before it surrendered, or the English said he dressed up like an old man and sneaked past the guards, which tried to portray him as a coward, but they don't think that would happen because they didn't let anyone in or out of the gates. So why would they let some old fella? But the other theory was he wasn't there to begin with, but Edmund Mortimer, that great English noble who switched side, he was there, and he was in charge of defending the castle. But by the time now, the winter had come round and it was incredibly cold, and it killed most of the soldiers who defended the castle.
Right, yeah.
And the English taunted the Welsh by having huge fires and cooking meat on them, and the Welsh were like freezing and starving, and they had like nothing left in them. They sent like a last-ditch message to the French via the sea, and also to the Scots, and they begged them for help, but nothing came. And then Edmund Mortimer died defending Harlech. When they breached the gates, he was there, the last man fighting, and died. And all these images make such a good... You can picture the castle falling, like the death of Rhys the, like Glyndŵr's right-hand man getting caught, captured, killed.
And
Edmund
Mortimer, the sort of unlikely ally,
exactly,
sort of fighting to
and
the death for the cause.
He died fighting to the death. And when Harlech fell, Glyndŵr's beloved wife Marged, his daughter Catrin, Edmund, who married her, their son Lionel, their 3 daughters, they were all captured and sent to the Tower of London. And what's really sad here, Catrin knew her children would all die because they were like could be in line of the throne, not just from Glyndŵr, but because of Mortimer's side, who had like claim to the throne. Whilst he was there, he was like, she knew they were all going to die. But while she was there, she found out all of the bravest of Glyndŵr's lieutenants who'd refused pardons were hung up, and they'd been hung, drawn, and quartered, and they were all lying in the streets to London. So all of
so no one gave up the Glyndŵr.
No, not a
loyal
single
man. Loyalty.
Which isn't. I'll talk about this later on, but it cannot be overstated how insane it is that not a single one sold him out. Or if they did, they never, ever, ever led to his capture. Like all of his captains got hung, drawn, and quartered, and eviscerated. They got their innards burnt in front of them. They were then impaled on spikes, and none of them gave him up. And none of them ever gave him up. But by this time, all of Glyndŵr's family, bar one, were dead by 1415. If we go back a little bit, by 1409 to 1410, the lords of Abergavenny, Glamorgan, Pembroke, Merioneth, Rhethyn, Gower, Powys, Ewes, Lacy, and Oswestry were all given royal decree to return to their castles with an army and reinforce every garrison. And these are reports when Glyndŵr's war party, he now went back to raiding because he didn't have a big enough army to properly do it.
Yeah.
And he had Scottish and French mercenaries, which Glyndŵr still was paying for, and they burnt down any English point of interest they could, but they couldn't hold a proper fight. They would just burn the shit out of, they'd go to Abergavenny Castle, burn it down, fuck off, Pembroke, burn it down, and just do that all over.
In and out all the time,
yeah. So our boy was back on his bullshit. He was ambushing patrols, taking out English garrisons, and he kept the fight of his free Wales completely alive. And then, so far, right, this is mad. The northern hills of Glamorgan were like the last resistance. So Cardiff and the Vale pacified, but the valleys were the last place that he was like just keeping an eye. And the English could never get to him. But by this time, too many of the Welsh had been killed. The homes, the towns, the farms, the churches. Welshmen had been fined into like beyond extreme poverty. And Henry V took all of the Welsh nobles' lands confiscated, and this great war of independence was ending. Like I mentioned before, the superior numbers, over 10 times the resources and wealth England had at its disposal, began to turn the tide. The much larger, better equipped English forces overwhelmed the 8 Welsh. Owain remained free, but his ancestral home was completely gone, and he was a hunted prince. But he still continued this rebellion, and now he was like, fuck it. He was distraught about his wife, and there's a theory that he wanted to die in battle, so he would like constantly lead. Even at the start of the rebellion, he wouldn't.
How old would he be at this point? Like touching 60?
Close to 60, like nearly at 60. And he was like, his big theory is he was desperate to die in battle, and he was like, and beforehand, like I mentioned,
I love it.
He was the rebellion, so he couldn't die, and now the rebellion's failing. He's like, fuck it, I will die in this, and he led every charge against English garrisons in the hope he would die and join his family, but he just wouldn't die. So
I was too fucking hard. Couldn't die.
Well, in like 1412, he took over. In 1410, he led a rebel into Shropshire, took it over for a bit. 1412, he carried out a final massive successful raid with his like big faithful soldiers. He cut through loads of the king's men in the ambush in Brecon, where he captured that bastard Dafydd Gam. You know that guy who was
yeah.
So this is 12 years into the rebellion now, and Dafydd Gam in English is known as like Crooked David, and we mentioned him a few times as being like this bastard traitor. But in fact, I read this, and it's slightly disputed from what I've read online. But the term gammy comes from the epithet of gam, which is like a soft mutated Welsh word for cam. But the University of Wales dictionary notes, according to like tradition, Sir Dafydd Gam, he was either one-eyed or cross-eyed, regarded as like a traitor by most people in Wales. So the reputation served him to describe things that were like wonky or broken as gammy, hence the gammy leg.
You can sort of hear like gammy, crooked, traitor. Like, you know, you can see the kind of the etymology line.
The other etymology is Irish, but nearly all of it points to being Welsh.
Like I said, gam. I say gam, cam is step in Welsh. Step, so like it would kind of make sense, like gam,
bad
like,
step,
bad step, exactly.
Yeah, broken step. So yeah, but yeah, so he did this in 1412. He took him over and then like got him ransomed again and beat the shit out of him and got some more things in. And that's when Gam
just beat the shit out of him.
Yeah, well, he was pretty tough with his prisoners. But this was the last time Owain was seen officially alive by his enemies in 1412. Although there's stories about him taking refuge in a place called Scudamore family. But in 1413, Henry IV died, so he spent his entire reign fighting Glyndŵr. And now his son, Henry V, comes in and he adopts a very different attitude. Hal comes in and he becomes conciliatory. And he's like, right, he offers royal pardons to every single leader of the revolt, bar Glyndŵr, and he offers opponents of his father's regimes like safe passage. And as late as 1414, when there's rumours that in Hereford, there's a guy called John Oldcastle was communicating with Owain and his men. The king sent reinforcements there and all the major castles, and he was like, no, it's fine, it's absolutely fine. But the English were still really concerned that Glyndŵr was still coming. So yeah, like I said, when he came in, he was like, right, even if you were an English person helping with them, it's done. We are now like, this is over. And then there's loads of
just apart from Glyndŵr's, yeah.
Yeah, so he was offering it to everyone but Glyndŵr and his like direct descendants, and then loads of Glyndŵr's men end up leaving Wales for good. So this guy called Henry Gwyn, called White Henry, he had a substantial heir to Llanstefan, and he left Wales forever, and he was to die in service of Charles VI of France. Loads of the Welsh went to France, right, and lots of them died at the Battle of Agincourt, which is like you end up facing Henry V again.
So you actually, full circle, you go around and fight for the French, but often fight the guys who pushed you away.
So he also died at the hands of their comrades because they would died from Welsh archers sometimes. Another guy from Glyndŵr's army was called Griffith Young. He was a permanent exile, but by 1415 he moved to Paris, and then he lived for 20 years after that and became the first Bishop of Ross in Scotland, and then he became Bishop of Hippo in North Africa. But like I mentioned, we're like 1415. Glyndŵr had lost his entire family, bar Meredith, his one remaining son. Both of them, by 1415, received a royal official pardon and a chance to negotiate for peace. So 15 years into this massive rebellion, nothing like this has happened in Britain before or since. There's been like, yes, in Ireland, but not in Britain. There's never been an open rebellion for 15 years. But Glyndŵr and his son refused, and then this is when they suspect Glyndŵr died because his son received another pardon in 1417, but it no longer mentioned Glyndŵr. So they're thinking he's dead. He's only in his 60s. He's dead now. Yeah, but it's absolutely insane. And despite the numerous rewards, and this is like probably the most important thing to reiterate, they were offering life-changing wealth for generations to betray Glyndŵr, and not a single person ever betrayed him enough to be captured.
The fucking price of loyalty, mate. I love it.
Well, it's genuinely unheard of. Like, no man has caused over a decade of war against the most powerful nation ever to exist and wasn't caught, betrayed, or killed.
Goes to show, doesn't it, the price, the worth of a belief, isn't it? You know,
do you know what I mean?
This guy who like really embodied the belief of like a free Wales, and that was worth more to these guys than, like you said, generational wealth, like you said.
Literally, can you name a single freedom fighter ever, or even not a freedom fighter, a dictator who managed to go against another army and survive. He literally started a war against the biggest army, the most important, powerful army there's ever. Pretty much, the British Empire starts from like the 12th century.
Yeah,
and he fought against them and never lost. And it's insane, and no one knows where he's buried, but it's thought he died peacefully as an old man, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. But potentially he visited an old friend's house, and it's suggested in 1415 the very last Welshman to be titled Prince of Wales died. And there's no more. There's one before I get to the very end, which I think we should put a shot for. There's one more mad thing to mention. There's a thing called the Southampton Plot of August 1415. There's a conspiracy to assassinate the new Henry V and at Southampton before he goes to invade France for Agincourt. So just before they set off on Southampton. And Edmund Mortimer is not the Edmund Mortimer who we mentioned, but he's a son or he's a family descendant there. Who has a stronger claim. So just to point out, he's a different Edmund Mortimer who married Glyndŵr's daughter, but the same family. The plot was led by Richard of Conisburg, Henry Scrope, and Thomas Graham, and it appears to have involved a plan to raise a rebellion in England, while coordinated with Glyndŵr, linking it directly to the Glyndŵr Rising. So this is still in the 1450. So 1415, literally as Glyndŵr was dying,
he
had enough sway to get three of the largest armies in England, or
to sort of consider allying with him. He's political fucking maverick. I love it.
But there's the Mortimer involved in this actually went against the other allies he had and told the king himself what was happening. So all the ringleaders were arrested, tried, and executed in August 1415, which allowed Henry V to eliminate pretty much all internal opposition.
All conspirators.
And then, then he went to Agincourt, marking like the final moments of Glyndŵr's rebellion, intersected with like high-level English political intrigue. But I got a few things here. It doesn't end there. 1415, rebels were present in County Meirionydd. There's evidence to suggest they never surrendered. 1422, long after the rest of Wales was pacified, Robert ap Doe was hung in Welshpool for being a Glyndŵr rebel. In the 30s and 40s of that year, there were ambushes and murders of government officials across Wales. In the 16th century, there were Gwylliad Cocham Maddwy, the Red Bandits of Maddwy, who we did an episode on. Remember I mentioned throughout this, there's like the North of Red Head.
It's a through line with the red hair stuff. You did a good episode on that,
and so they were directly linked to Glyndŵr's course. And the devastated country was sucked dry for so after the war, there's 20 years where they tried to refill the royal coffers, they still couldn't. So they then started to employ massive taxes to raise back for all these interventions and invasions. Welshmen were no longer allowed to help each other harvest each other's field in case they were conspiring, which kept the Welsh starved and too weak to fight. So we were no longer allowed to help each other out because they were worried. A Welshman's word was no longer legally accepted in the court of law against an Englishman. So if I said, no, that's not true against you as an Englishman, it wasn't accepted.
Doesn't count.
We were left to find, most of the Welsh ended up leaving Wales to find money for the French or Scottish armies. All the martial lords were now essentially financially ruined. They had nothing left to pay. They had so the marshals ended here because they could no longer afford their lands. Lord Grey, the bastard who started this entire thing, was now financially completely ruined and was no longer repaid by Henry and ended up being bankrupt.
I'll take that.
I know, it's pretty nice. The impact was so that the land wasn't able to raise any income tax the same way until 1428. So places like Cowbridge, Caerphilly, Swansea, Cardiff, the Gower took decades to gain any prosperity and were deemed too risky to invest in for decades afterwards.
So those martial laws just lost everything.
I'll
take that.
Now that's why you no longer hear the martial lords. They were gone. They completely lost everything. After Owain's death, there was little resistance to English rule. But next we have the Tudor dynasty, or the Tudor dynasty, started by a true Welshman, Henry Tudor, which many saw as a prominent figure, but as we know, doesn't quite work out in the same way. Henry IV, Part 1, was a Shakespearean play which portrays a guy called Owain Glendower, instead of Owen Glyndŵr, as a wild and exotic man who claims he's able to call spirits from the vastly deep. So this is a play written contemporary, describing what he was like. after he died. He said he was ruled by magic and tradition in sharp contrast to the more logical and highly emotional Hotspur, who was also prominent in the play. Glyndŵr, in quotations, is further noted as being not in the role of common men, and a worthy gentleman, exceedingly well read and profited in its strange concealments, valiant as a lion, and wondrous, affable, and bountiful as the mines of India. Which blows my mind that they knew about India at the same time.
Yeah, when you think about things back in those days, I always think it's mad because oh shit in hell, that was close.
Jeez, Billy Booze.
Almost spelled this entire thing. Thank God the lid was on just tight enough. Whew. Yeah, but no, I agree. It's when you think about in Shakespearean times, I'm on about India and things like that. You're like, you didn't know about that. You only fucking, you barely fucking got any running water.
But they said so. Shakespeare also describes him as that damned magician, which is referring to him being able to control the weather. And then in terms of post life, there's loads of things named after him. Owain became second to Ynys Bevan in the 100 Most Important Welsh Heroes in 2004. Stamps were issued of his likeness in 1974 and 2008. There are streets, parks, and public squares named after him throughout Wales. There's a campaign to make 16th of September Owain Glyndŵr Day, the day Owain raised the standard, a public holiday in Wales. Owain is now remembered as a national hero, and numerous small groups have adopted his symbolism to advocate for independent Wales. You mentioned before the Meibion Glyndŵr, Sons of Glyndŵr, who are responsible for building English homes in Wales. We're going to do a full episode on them.
Yeah.
There's the Owain Glyndŵr Hotel in Corwen, 18th century. Owain Glyndŵr Pub in Cardiff. The Waymark. There's a walk, 132-mile long stretch called the Glyndŵr's Way from mid Wales up to Sirach, his homeland. There's 2 ships and by the Royal Navy launched. There's the 36-gun 5th freight frigate HMS Owain Glyndŵr, which she served in the Baltic Sea during the Gunboat War, where she participated in the siege of Anholt Island and then in the Channel. And then in 1822 and 1824, she served in the West African Squadron of chasing down slave ships, capturing at least 3 slave ships going over to America.
I never even knew about the ships and that thing. No.
Also part of the Indian Eastman Blackwall Frigate Brigade, Owain Glyndŵr, again stopping pirates. Then in 1923, a Vela locomotive was named Owain. The locomotive is still operational and was one of the few used by the British Rail until it was privatised. Another train called Owain Glyndŵr, I'll skip that one. Right, but should we quickly get a shot ready for the final part?
Just do, mate.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to pour one for the very last. I have a poem.
I'm going full Cappy Morgs for me. What are you drinking then? What's your little shot of choice?
Cointreau.
That looks like a huge.
I know.
Huge.
Well, I reckon. Let's keep this in the recording. Get yourself a bigger one. Let me just.
Oh, good God.
Come on.
Okay.
So I'm going to finish this epic saga. We've done about 5 hours of recording here, which is pretty fucking good.
It's been a biggie.
How have you felt about it, man? I've loved it. Listen to it.
Absolutely bloody loved it, mate. It's been, like I said, it has literally been an epic. It's been a saga. It's been an odyssey.
And how good would it be as an actual movie, man? Even fucking
Braveheart
couldn't do 15
blows
years.
My mind. Yeah, even Braveheart didn't do 15 years. He's a puss. He's a puss compared to Glyndŵr. Mate, this is going to fucking kill me doing this.
So to finish this odyssey out, and if you bear with me, I did mention the very first episode I wanted to read a quote from this 1905 book called Flame Bearers of Welsh History, and you were very kind to me, Jack. You allowed me to save it to the end.
Of course.
So this is the end of it, and I think at the end of this, everyone listening, I'd love it if you pour us a drink. Me and Jack have just got a big drink to screen. I've got maybe a bigger one than Jack, because I'm cooler. I've got Cointreau. Yeah. I got a French drink to honor the French who supported him.
You've got Captain Morgan's, mate. Who
wish to honour a better
Welshman himself. So there we go.
Diane. So here we go. The very final lines of this epic. The author from Flame Bearers of Welsh History, he said, "It is not known where he died. In Gwent, they say he did not die. They say he and his men are sleeping in Ogafedinas, buckled in their armour, their spears leaning against their shoulders, their swords across their knees. They are waiting till the day comes for them to sally forth and fight for the land again. But others and learned men have vexed themselves looking for the real grave. They say they cannot be sure where it is. That is because they have wandered from the right way. Look into Kentchurch or Monington or the green shires of Hereford where his loving daughter lived. They are all wrong. His grave is known, well known. It's beside no church, neither under no shadow of an ancient yew. It is in a spot safer and more sacred still. Rain does not fall on it. Hail nor sleet nor chill sod above it. It is forever green with the green of eternal spring. Sunny the light on it, close and warm, and dear it lies, sheltered from all storms, from old cold or grey oblivion. Time shall not touch it, decay shall not dishonour it, for the grave is in the heart of every true Cymro. For there, forever, from generation into generation, great Owain's heart lies dreaming on and on, safe forever and forever.
Love it.
Iechyd da, boys.
Iechyd da. Oh, wow.
There we go. What do you reckon there, boys?
Oh, fuck it.
You're God. Yeah.
Y mab darogan. Cheers, mate.
Y mab darogan, da iawn, boy. Should we do a Patreon where you tell us how you'd make that as a film? Because I would say Jack's always the better writer out of the two of us. And you could... What's it called? Writing a... It's not called a bleed. There's a word for
it. Like a treatment or a...
Treatment, that's it. Yeah. Anyway.
No, it could make such a good movie out of it. But I tell you what, we'll get Director Dan to do it.
No, get Director Couch to do it. And I'll be the, the hunk. I'll just be the hunk in it.
I'll be this guy,
Got this far, please sign up to the Patreon. It honestly makes such a difference.
If you can listen to 5 hours of us yapping
you can send £5 our way.
Do 5 stars, come on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jack.
Oh, so thank you to God, because with all things are possible.
All right, no star. Ta-ra, boys.
No star, bow. Ta-ra.